What is up, guys? It's your buddy Blue Spooky here with another daily video. Your standard 1 hour and 30-minute affair. If you guys end up enjoying this video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have any thoughts about the stories in this video, please be sure to leave them in the comments below, as one of my favorite things about doing these videos is reading your guys' comments, even if I can't always respond to them. Last but not least, if you'd like to go that extra step and support the channel even more than you do by just watching the video already, go ahead and click that join button next to the subscribe button. It's $2 a month at the lowest tier, and you get a special icon next to your name when you comment, and special emoticons that you can use when you comment as well. No content will be locked behind the paywall, of course. It's simply something extra you can do if you'd like to support the channel a little more. Either way, I will get right into the video, and I hope you guys enjoy the true scary stories. Thanks for watching. I live a little bit out in the country. It's a quiet area, and most people have a little bit more land. I remember that one Saturday, late afternoon, while I was driving home, I noticed a yard sale sign. It was very unusual to see this sort of thing in my neighborhood. In fact, this was probably the first one I was aware of since living in the area. Because of that, I was very curious and decided to drive over and see what items would be for sale. It was a little bit later, so I wasn't sure if it was still going on or not, but the signs were still up, so why not try and see? I followed them, which led me to a street that was only about a minute away from my home. I'd never been down this one before. It was a very quiet street, surrounded on all sides by woods. The second to last house before the end of this dead-end street was where the sale was. The house had a large front yard. There also was a very long and narrow driveway to the left of the house. After the driveway, there was this little open area of grass, and then there was a dense woods beyond that. There appeared to be items spread out for sale in the grass between the driveway and the woods, but I didn't notice anybody there, and there were no other cars parked on the side of the street or anything. Still, I thought I should check it out. I parked my car, got out, and started walking onto the property. When I got past the driveway to the grassy area, I saw many items lying on the grass there. There was a lot of smaller furniture, lamps, mirrors, nightstands, many other random things as well. I looked all around, but I didn't see anybody at all. I wondered where the owner was. Had they gone inside and ended the sale or something? I thought about just leaving. It was about that time when I remember that I heard a noise coming from the woods behind me. It was clearly a person. The noise didn't really seem like one that would come from an animal. I looked over and thought I could see a man moving from behind some trees to another set in the woods. They were quite dense, so I didn't see his features very well at all. But there was clearly someone hiding out in the woods. Was this the owner of the sale? I couldn't help but feel creeped out. Why would they be in the woods hiding? After not hearing any noises for a few moments, I began to back away. It didn't seem like a place I should be anymore. I started walking to the driveway to go back down it. When I made it about halfway, I heard some more noises from the woods behind me. I looked over my shoulder and saw a man emerge from them. He was looking at me and began to walk in my direction. At first, I kept going, but when I made it to the very end of the driveway, I turned around and stopped. The man was looking at me with this dead expression on his face, just charging toward me. I asked him if this was his yard sale, and when I did, the man didn't say anything at all. He kept on stomping toward me. It was really weird. At that point, I ran to my car parked on the other side of the street. I got to it and got inside. When I did, the man had now made it out to the street area. I quickly drove away and went home. The whole thing seemed kind of odd to me. Just a few days later, I read up on Facebook that a man had been caught in connection to an in the area. He was the man I had seen at that yard sale. When I read the story, I found out that he'd argued with the homeowner having a yard sale. I guess he was trying to rob him, and the man having the sale didn't want to give him anything, so the man attacked the owner and started to beat him. The owner of the sale was able to get away into the woods and escaped onto a neighbor's property. When I realized this, I also realized that I must have had the very lucky fortune to have gotten there just a short time after that incident happened. I feel lucky the man didn't me too. A few years ago, I moved into this one neighborhood. I was living alone and renting a home because I worked in the area. I no longer live in that area, but I do remember the creepiest thing that happened when I did so. A few weeks after I moved into the house, one of the neighbors had a yard sale. The street that I lived on had quite a few houses on it, and I hadn't really met any of the neighbors yet. Nothing strange had happened at all up to that point. The yard sale was at the house directly across the street, and one house to the left. I'm pretty sure it was a Friday or something, so I walked over from my house to where the yard sale was. There were a few other people there. The house belonged to this lady named Ruth. I talked to her for a short time while I was there. As I was in her front yard, looking through her things for sale, though, I noticed the house next door. This would be the house directly across the street from mine. Just inside one of the windows, I could see a man looking out and staring at me. It was a little unnerving, so I looked away and continued to go through the various items for sale. A few minutes later, I glanced up and noticed the man was still at the window staring at me. This was really strange. Soon enough, though, I picked out the things I wanted to buy and went up to Ruth. We talked briefly, and she was very nice. I told her about how I'd recently moved in, and then I left our yard and headed back over to my own house. While I was crossing the street, I couldn't help but notice the man still observing me. He was at another window now, though. I found his behavior really odd to be sure, but I just went back home. After that, a few hours later, which was the early evening now, I noticed out of my front window that the man was now outside in his yard. He was just kind of wandering around randomly, and I noticed him looking at my place over and over. This was starting to seem really unnerving. I just tried to ignore it, though. I didn't notice the guy for the rest of the day. That night, though, I woke up at 2 o'clock in the morning. The very first thing I heard was a knocking at my front door. I had no idea who it could be. When I got up and looked out of a window, I saw it was that neighbor from across the street, the same man who'd been staring at me all day. Obviously, I had no idea why he would be here at 2 a.m., and I was definitely not going to answer the door for him. I stayed near the front area of the house, though. The man knocked again, and then finally walked away. I looked through the window and saw him go back inside his house. I was very creeped out by this whole series of events. The next day, the yard sale was still going on, so I walked over to Ruth and decided to ask her what she knew about the guy next door. She told me the guy had a criminal history and was a really sketchy guy, and that I should try to avoid him. I then left and went back to my place. I was more worried now about why the guy had been over at 2 a.m. Over the next few days, I didn't really see him at all. I was just about ready to put it off as a one-off thing and not really think about it much anymore. That was until one night. There was another knocking at the door very late. It woke me up once again, and I knew this had to be the same guy. I got up and looked out the window, and there he was, standing right outside the front door. He knocked another time, and obviously I did not answer. I made sure he couldn't see me. I hoped he would just walk away again like before. This time, though, he did not. He stayed by the door for a while. He turned around, and I thought he would walk away, but instead he turned to the left and walked toward one of my windows. I moved out of the way. He pressed his face up against it and tried looking inside. I couldn't take it anymore. I called the police. The man stayed at my window for a short time before slipping around the side of my home. I could no longer see him, and I just hoped he wouldn't break in. I didn't hear or see anything until the police got there, though. When the police arrived, they found the man walking around in my next-door neighbor's backyard. He claimed he simply had the wrong address and was going to a friend's house. Obviously, that didn't make any sense, because he literally lived right across the street. He went back to his house, and I was nervous something like that would happen again, but thankfully it did not. That's really because the guy only lived in that home for another month, and then moved somewhere. Where or why he moved, I'm not exactly sure, but I'm just glad I didn't have to interact with that man anymore. I don't know what his plans were for me. I own a home, and I lived by myself in it. I've not lived there for really that long, maybe 6 months or so. This is something that just happened a few weeks ago. Now, for some background, I've always considered the neighborhood to be very average. It's not a wealthy area, but it's also not known to be a bad neighborhood. Most of the people I've met have been very nice. Of course, I didn't meet all of my neighbors, just a few. In the entire 6 months or so that I lived there, though, everything in my house has been fine. That is, except for one night, a couple of weeks ago. Like I mentioned, something very strange happened to me. I was in my living room, sitting on my couch late one night. I think it was about 11 p.m. or so. All of a sudden, my doorbell rang 3 or 4 times in a row. It was really surprising. I didn't know why somebody would be at my house this late. I got up from the couch and walked over to the door. When I looked out the window, though, it didn't appear that anybody was there. I even opened up the door and went out onto the front step. I looked all around, but I didn't see anybody. Then I went back inside my house. Just a minute later, there was another knock on the front door. It was extremely loud. I went over to the door again, but once more, whoever was doing this knocking had disappeared. I figured it was probably just some neighborhood kids doing some ding-dong ditching. I thought they probably wouldn't bother coming back. I waited around the front door for a little while. After a few minutes, nobody seemed to have come back, so I returned to the living room. Maybe 10 minutes later, though, there was a loud banging on the front door again. This time, I also heard them knocking on the front window as well. I ran from the living room as fast as I could to get to the front door area, but when I arrived, the people had stopped. I was just about able to see them running away, though. Instead of kids, what I saw appeared to be 3 fully grown men running from the end of my driveway out into the street. I had figured it had to be teenagers, but these guys looked much older. Maybe it was still just a harmless prank, but the fact that one of them was banging on the front window next to the door this time was a little bit unnerving. Another 10 minutes went by with nothing happening. I returned to the other room, now on edge. Some time went by, and I actually thought they must have been gone for good now. By this time, it was getting very late. They came back again, and this time was the worst by far. I heard a really loud bang at the front door. I started going over again, but as I was doing so, I suddenly heard the sound of glass shattering. When I arrived near the front door, I saw the window on it had been broken. There was glass all over the ground. This made me so angry, I ran over to the door and actually stepped outside. I saw the same 3 men running away into the street. I ran through my front yard and into the street after them. They were pretty far ahead of me, but I saw them go into a house that was at the end of the street. After they all went inside, I kept going down until I got to that house. My plan was to confront them. This was not a silly joke anymore, but now a property crime. Their house was the worst-looking one on the entire street. I walked up to the front door and knocked on it, but nobody answered. I continued to knock on their door. I wasn't going to go away. After I had been knocking for a few minutes, I heard somebody yell from inside for me to leave. I yelled back that they broke my window. There was a few minutes of nothing, but then I heard somebody coming from behind the house. There was a person out in the yard. I couldn't see much because they had no porch light, or any light at all really. Moments after hearing whoever this was get to the side of the house, I looked over and heard something whiz past my head and hit a bush nearby. They chucked a rock at me. Another one nearly hit me right in the face. Instead, it hit the side of the house. I turned around and started running away. When I was sprinting off the property, I heard at least 2 people laughing, which made me really angry. Still, this was a dangerous situation, and I knew I couldn't stay there. I got back to my house. Once I was there, I called the police. They came a short time later, and after showing them my window and telling them what happened, they went over to that house. Apparently, about 5 adults lived there, and most of them were addicts. They had multiple illegal inside the house, so when the cops showed up at the front door, they really panicked. One guy tried to run away. The police ended up going inside and finding all the contraband, and all of them were arrested. I pressed charges against them, both for throwing rocks at me and breaking my window. Shortly after that, the house was sold to new owners, who turned the place around. I live by myself in a 1-bedroom apartment. My building has 4 floors, and I'm on the very top. I've enjoyed living there for the most part, but I almost moved out after something happened a while ago. It's now been 4 months since the incident occurred, and I had been living there long enough to know several of my neighbors and what they looked like. I would occasionally see them coming and going. I wasn't really friends with any of them, though. Well, one night, just like any other, I went to bed at the time I usually did, about 10 o'clock or so. I remember waking up in the middle of the night, though, and immediately hearing this noise. It sounded like my apartment door was being unlocked. The next thing that I knew, my front door flew open. When I heard this, I was suddenly wide awake. I got out of my bed immediately and stood up, but I didn't really hear anything else. Now I was wondering what exactly was going on. After a minute, I walked to my doorway, which was closed. I opened up the door. Every light was off in the rest of my apartment, so I couldn't really see much of anything. The only light came from my window, which was partially open. There were some lights outside shining in. I looked out into the rest of my apartment, and after several moments, I didn't see or hear anything there. There was this light switch that I could just barely reach from where I was. I felt around the wall and turned the light on. As soon as it came on, I saw this random woman standing in the middle of my living room. It was one of the craziest things I'd ever experienced. As I looked at her closer, though, I realized this was not some random woman at all. It was one of my neighbors. As soon as I noticed her, she moved and started running away toward the front door. She left my apartment and was gone just like that. I really had no clue what was happening, but I knew that that woman was obviously not supposed to be in my place. I called the police and waited around until they got there. The woman I recognized as my neighbor from down the hallway. I had never even spoken to her a single time, but I had seen her a few times here and there. After the police got there, I told them my neighbor had somehow broken in. I gave them all the details of what happened, and they went over to her apartment and knocked on her door. I remembered that she acted like she had been asleep and had no clue what was going on. She completely denied the entire thing. I was afraid it was going to be just my word against hers. Luckily, my building had very good security cameras. After looking at them, it was clear that she had entered my place. Somehow, she was able to easily pick the lock. I honestly have no clue how. I pressed charges against her, and she was evicted shortly after. My apartment building also had to replace the locks. I really don't know why she had to get into my place like that, but I'm really glad I woke up before she could do anything else. Last year, I was selling a motorized scooter on Facebook Marketplace. This scooter was pretty new, and one of the nicer ones as well. I got it brand new for over $500. Well, not long after listing it, it started to get some interest. There was this one guy who messaged me about it pretty early on. He said that he wanted to come over and take a look at it. I asked him how serious he was about the item, and he said very. I had my scooter in my garage, and after this guy agreed to pay full asking price for it, I told him he could come over and buy it. I gave him my address, which is a pretty standard house. I lived there with my wife. That evening at around 6 p.m., the guy came over. I went out into the driveway and met up with him. I can't remember what his name was. I was basically expecting him to see the scooter, turn it on, and try it, then give me the money. I had my garage door open, and the scooter was just outside of it. The guy walked over and looked at it. We turned it on, and I showed him that it worked. The guy then looked at it for a while longer, and said that he would have to think about it further. I told him that I thought he said he was serious, and he said that he was. Then he said something about how he could get it when he got paid next week. I knew that probably meant this was a no, and I just said, alright, whatever. Then I said bye to the guy and he walked away. I put the scooter away back inside the garage, then went back inside my house. Hours later, at probably 10 or 11 p.m. that night, I was inside and going to go to bed very soon. I was in the living room with my wife when we heard this noise coming from outside. I couldn't exactly tell what it was. I got up to look out the window, but really couldn't see anything. As I was looking, though, we heard another mysterious noise. I still couldn't tell what was going on. I went over to the front door and opened it. I knew the noise was coming from outside, somewhere near the driveway area. After I opened up the door, I heard some movement from the bushes near the garage. I stepped outside and asked who was there. Nobody answered me. I walked closer to where I heard the sounds coming from. It was very dark and quiet now. I couldn't see very well at all, but I continued to go closer. Soon, I reached the garage area. There were some bushes to the side of it, between the fence leading to my next-door neighbor's yard. I walked over and realized that the smaller door to my garage was open a crack. At this point, I probably should have walked back inside my house and called the police right away, but I didn't do that. Instead, I walked to the door and opened it. I looked inside of that dark garage. Moments later, I saw movement. I noticed a man walking towards me. I moved back and left the garage and went back toward my home. I heard the guy running in another direction behind me. When I looked over, I noticed it was the exact same man who had come to look at the scooter earlier. He ran down the street in the opposite direction and then quickly went out of my line of sight. Somehow he had gotten into my garage, probably to try and steal the scooter. I called the police and moved the scooter inside of my house. The cops came out and I had a conversation with them, but the guy was obviously long gone. After that, they left. Luckily, the man never came back. His Facebook account was deleted too, so I couldn't give it to the police for information. That was my craziest experience with Facebook Marketplace. This is something I will never forget. It happened almost 5 years ago. Now for some background. I'm a woman and was looking to buy a car at the time of this story. I wanted to get something used and somewhat cheap, so I checked out both Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace. After searching those sites for about a week, I found this car that looked really good. It seemed to be a good deal. After all of my research, I wanted to take a look at it, so I contacted the seller, saying how I was interested and all that stuff. We ended up talking and arranging a time to meet up and look at the car. The seller was a guy named Mike, bigger guy with a dark goatee. We agreed to meet at a gas station about 5 miles away from where I lived. I figured that meeting in a public place would be safe, so I drove my current car at the time, which was barely running, and I got to the gas station at about 7 p.m. or so. Things were very quiet. Minutes later, I saw the car I wanted to buy entering the lot. It parked at the back. I walked over and met up with Mike. We talked about the car a little bit, and he asked me if I wanted to take it for a test drive first. I did. I wanted to make sure that the car ran well and everything. I remember Mike told me to get in the passenger seat, and he would show me some things with the car, then let me drive it. Nothing really seemed strange about that at first. I got inside, and we then left the gas station and started driving down the road. Mike started talking about the car again, saying a bunch of basic stuff. After about 5 minutes, I was expecting him to stop driving and let me take over, but he just kept on going down the road. I didn't even know where we were anymore. Mike was driving the car down these quiet roads with woods on both sides. Mainly, we were going farther and farther away from where I lived and the area I was familiar with. After 10 minutes, I started to get really worried. Mike was also talking less and less. Before, he would be saying something about the car every minute or so, but now he was mostly driving in silence. Finally, I said to Mike, "So, can I drive the car now?" Mike quickly responded and said it would be just 1 more minute, and he'd let me drive it soon enough. 2 or 3 more minutes passed by of us driving in silence. Then Mike finally started to pull over to the side of the road. We were the only vehicle around. Things were very dark and quiet. I thought he was finally going to let me drive, but as we came to a stop, I noticed this little path going off into the woods off the road. There was an SUV with the lights off, parked on this path. After we came to a stop, I noticed the driver's and passenger door opening up on the SUV. I didn't know what was going on, but I had a really bad feeling about this. Mike then turned to me and told me to give him my phone. I asked why. At the same time, I saw multiple people walking from the SUV. They were a good 50 feet away, and I couldn't really tell any details about them. Mike was starting to talk, but I don't remember anything he said. As soon as I saw those people approaching, I knew I needed to run away right now. I opened up the passenger door and got out. I then just started sprinting off into the woods. As I started running, I heard some commotion behind me. People behind me started to run, and I heard several men's voices shouting. I didn't stop though. I kept running out into the woods and started running through the trees and brush. I heard the people chasing after me, but I didn't stop. I continued to run. I took my phone out while doing so and dialed 911. I continued running. I could still hear the people behind me, but they were now a ways back. I didn't know if I'd gotten on with 911 or not, because I was too busy running to stop and look. I just started saying how I was being chased in the woods and needed help right now. I hoped that somebody would hear me. I ran for about as long as I could, and soon stopped hearing the chasing behind me. I was able to slow down, and eventually I stopped and hid. I didn't hear anything, but once again I called the police. They were on the way already. I tried to tell them where I was, and they were able to locate me pretty well based off my call. Soon I made my way back through the woods and met up with the police. Mike and the other people were long gone, but I told the police what had happened and gave descriptions as best as I could. The only person I could really describe, though, was Mike. The police were able to locate him not long after. I just feel lucky to have gotten away at all. A few years ago, I was taking a cross-country road trip for work. I was driving by myself, and each night would stop off at a hotel and sleep for the night. Well, sometimes, in certain locations, there are not exactly very many options for hotels. I remember I was driving late into the night one of those days. The hotel I got was this little one. It was more of a motel. It was in a quiet town that didn't really have much of anything. This motel had 2 levels of rooms. Each one would open up to the little sidewalk in front of the parking lot. I didn't have high expectations from the start. It was just a place to sleep, and I was very tired. I parked my car, got out, and got my room key from the guy in the office. I then walked down the sidewalk to my room. It was at that point when I saw this guy walking down the same sidewalk as me. It was a man wearing a black jacket, walking very slowly. I entered my room and went inside, then pretty much immediately started getting ready to go to bed. Maybe 10 minutes later, I was getting into bed when I noticed out the front window the guy that I'd just seen entering. He was just kinda standing around. It was a little weird to me. The guy was not facing my window, but the other direction. I watched, and finally he walked a little bit to the right and out of my view. I went over and closed the shades. Almost immediately after that, the guy tried opening my room door. Of course it was locked and he couldn't get in. I didn't know what this guy was doing. I went back to the window and looked outside, but the man had already fled. He was nowhere to be seen now. I went back to the bed and decided to just try and go to sleep. Just moments later, there was a knocking on my door. I figured it must be the same guy, so I ignored it entirely. To my surprise, the man didn't attempt to knock again. In that moment, I was so tired that I soon fell asleep, but I wasn't asleep for very long. I remember waking up a short time later to someone banging furiously on the front door. I knew it was likely the same man again. He started yelling and cursing, demanding that I open the door for him right now. I had no idea why this guy was bothering me. I called the front desk to the motel, but I got no response from them. I then called the police and shouted to the man that I was calling the police right now. He continued to yell at me from outside, though. The guy kept trying to open the door every now and then and continued to bang on it almost the entire time. This went on for the next 10 minutes until the police got there. Then the man was arguing with the police as well until they escorted him off the property. I was finally able to go back to sleep. Early the next morning, I left, and I was more than happy to get out of there and back on the road. For the rest of my trip, I made sure to get hotels that were a bit nicer than that one. This is something that happened a long time ago. I went on a road trip to visit some family. It was a pretty long trip and would take me about 10 hours. My plan was to do the whole drive in a day. Well, I made it in about 8 hours and was now driving at night with just about 2 hours to go. At that point, my car suddenly broke down. I was on this one road that was not quite a highway, a little bit quieter. I could see the light dimming in my car, and I knew that something was wrong. Then I started to lose power. Soon, I could not even drive the car anymore. It went slower and slower until it stopped altogether along the side of the road. There were hardly any other cars out driving at this hour. I got out my phone and called my Roadside Service AAA. I told them what happened, and they said they would send somebody to my location soon. Still, I figured it would take a little while for them to get there. My battery must have died or something. I didn't know exactly why. I couldn't turn on any lights inside of my car or anything to check. I went on my phone. I hoped Roadside Service would get there quickly, but I figured it would probably take at least 30 minutes. I mean, I was not exactly in a very populated area. About 5 or 10 minutes into the waiting, I saw headlights coming up from behind me. I hoped it was Roadside Service, until I noticed it was just an ordinary sedan. I knew Roadside Service would be in a truck of some sort. The car slowed down as it got closer, and pulled over to the side of the road behind me. I was wondering who this was and what they were doing. For a while, the car's lights stayed on, and the engine remained running. It then turned off. The driver's door opened, and I saw a man walk out. He started going toward the passenger side of my car. I thought this was odd. I would have figured he would go right to my window or something. The man ended up walking straight for my passenger side, and before I knew what was going on, he reached for my rear passenger door and tried to yank it open. I couldn't believe it. I had no idea what to do. I took my keys and tried starting the engine again, and unbelievably, it started right up. I didn't waste any time and drove away from him and out of there. I went until the next exit and waited at a gas station. I then called the police and my roadside service and told them what was going on. Luckily, the roadside service person wasn't that far away, so I was able to wait for them at the gas station peacefully. Things ended up working out just fine, and I never saw that guy or his car again. I still wonder what he was trying to do, though. This is something that happened when I was a kid. I think I was about 10 years old. During this time, I lived in a house with my parents and older sister. I had my own bedroom. One night, I woke up due to a very loud thunderstorm. I remember it was almost 2 o'clock in the morning, and there was this loud thunder happening outside over and over. When I woke up, I shot wide awake. I tried to fall back asleep for a minute, but I couldn't do so. I remember that at that point, I got out of my bed and looked out the window into the backyard. I could see it was raining very heavily, and there was a lot of lightning as well. I decided to play some games on my PlayStation in my bedroom until I got sleepy again or the storm stopped entirely. I always sort of had a hard time sleeping when loud noises were going on. I was hoping the storm would calm down very soon. I sat down in my gaming chair and started to play. For the next 10 minutes or so, that's all I did. At one point, I randomly turned around to look out the window, though, and when I did, I saw what appeared to be a person moving quickly away. I didn't really get a good look at all, but my heart immediately started racing. Why would somebody be at my window? I got up and walked over and looked out into the backyard. I couldn't really see anything. It was mostly just dark and raining. I went back over to my gaming chair and sat back down. Now I was really wide awake. I still didn't want to wake my parents or anything, though. I didn't know how to explain a person at my window. I hoped to just distract myself by playing more video games and that the problem would go away on its own. I remember I kept telling myself not to turn around and look to the window again. The window was directly behind me, by the way. I played on my PlayStation for maybe 20 or 30 more minutes, and I just got this feeling that I needed to turn around and look behind me right now. When I did, I saw the person standing at the window. Once again, they moved away, but it took slightly longer than the previous time. Whoever this was appeared to be a man, and he had been looking right at me. This time, I got up and ran out of my room to my parents down the hallway. I woke them up and told them there was a suspicious man at my window. They got up and checked outside, as well as calling the police, but the man was nowhere to be found. The police didn't find anything. It took me a long time to fall back asleep, but eventually I did. I covered my window and kept it covered for weeks after. I was too scared to look out of it. Luckily, that man did not come back. To this day, I still wonder who he even was. I currently live in an apartment, and this is an event that took place maybe a month ago. There was a big thunderstorm going on. I was inside my place, hearing the rain and thunder, and occasionally seeing the lightning. I didn't mind thunderstorms and found them to be pretty relaxing. It's kind of funny, actually. As a kid, I was extremely scared of them, but not anymore, really. During the storm, I was in my living room, watching a show on TV. Out of nowhere, at almost 10 o'clock, there was this really loud knock at my front door. It seemed kind of strange because of how late it was. I had no idea as to who it could be. I wasn't really close with any of my neighbors, especially not so that they would knock on my door at this hour. I decided to just ignore it. Then there was another loud knocking. I almost didn't get up at all, but I was curious now. I decided to go and see who was there. I was still pretty sure I didn't want to answer it though. I went over to the door and looked out of my peephole. I saw there was a man standing there who I did not recognize. He was wearing all black and looking right at my door. He had long hair that was wet, as if he'd been out in the rain for a while. The man just looked very creepy. I moved away from the door and hoped he would leave all on his own. After about a minute, though, he knocked again. I was still not going to answer. I stayed in the living room on my couch. He didn't knock again after that. I stayed out in the living room watching TV for another hour, then went into my bedroom to go to sleep. When I got into my room, I remember looking out of the window at the rain. My apartment was on the second floor. It looked out to the parking lot of the complex. When I did, I noticed the same man who'd knocked on my door was standing out there. He was just in the middle of the parking lot in the pouring rain, staring right up at my window. He wasn't moving or walking around. He was just looking right at me. It really gave me the creeps. I closed my window shades and tried my best to fall asleep. Eventually, I was able to. Since then, I haven't seen the guy. I still don't know who he is or why he even knocked on my door, nor why he was staring up at my window. I'm just hoping I never see him again. So, this story took place just a few weeks ago. It's really bizarre and also scary as well. I play in a fantasy football league with a bunch of my friends. If anybody doesn't know, in fantasy football, you draft players that are in the NFL, and based on their performances for the week, your team gets points. Your team plays another team every week. There's playoffs and a championship game at the end as well. Well, in the league that I play with my friends, whoever gets last place in the league has to get a punishment. Before the season starts, people think of ideas for punishments. We vote on it and decide what it will be. So, everybody knew that this year, our punishment was to dress up as a clown. Then, the loser would have to walk down one of the busiest streets in our nearby city. Thankfully, I did not lose, but one of my best friends, Ben, did. My friend Jordan and I decided to go with him for his punishment. We were going to record it and send it to all of our buddies in the league. We went first to a party supply store and bought a very cheap clown mask and costume. Then we wrote on a piece of cardboard, "I suck at fantasy football." We drove to the city, which was about 15 minutes away. It's a pretty large city and also very busy. When we got there, the sun was setting, but there was still a lot of people out and about. Ben reluctantly put on his loser clown outfit, and we were all laughing like crazy. We parked in this little parking lot on the edge of downtown, and then walked several blocks. When we got into the heart of the city, Ben had to walk the entire way down the street and back. He kept trying to negotiate and make it a shorter walk, but it was our responsibility to make sure that punishment was fulfilled. Ben walked on the sidewalk and people were staring at him. We laughed and snapped our pictures and videos. Then we started to head back. When we did though, we noticed there was another person dressed up as a clown. It was really strange to see. I mean, there were a lot of people around, but I didn't expect to see someone else who looked like a clown. Obviously, we had to have Ben go over and say hi to his fellow compatriot. We walked over, and when we got over to him, we saw his mask and costume was a lot better than Ben's. He didn't seem very amused. The other clown just kind of stood there, and Ben attempted a handshake with him. He left him hanging. The man wasn't saying anything either, so we just left. We started walking back to our car, which was less than a 5-minute walk. We walked along the sidewalk away from where most of the people were. It was a much quieter area where we'd parked. About a minute into the walk, Jordan said the clown appeared to be following us. I looked back, and in fact did see him walking a bit behind us, still a ways away though. We all found this funny and figured the guy was just joking around. We kept walking, and surprisingly, the clown remained right behind us. Eventually, we crossed the street and had to go just another block to get to the car. When we crossed the street, it was a much quieter area, and hardly anybody else was around. The clown crossed the street as well. He appeared to be getting closer. I found it a bit strange. He was still behind us. Soon, we made it to the parking lot, and at that point, we saw the clown had started to run after us. We all hurried to get inside of the car. We were laughing, but I honestly found it a bit creepy. I have a smaller SUV, and I was driving with Jordan in the passenger seat and Ben in the back. I started the car, and we watched and laughed as the clown kept running after us. When the clown reached the parking lot, he stopped, and I started driving out. We would have to go right past him, and he was now standing right by the exit. When I was starting to drive by the clown, he turned and faced us, and I saw him pulling something out of his pocket. I didn't know what it was because I looked away to focus on the road, but next thing I knew, I heard a loud noise come from the back of the car and a crashing of glass. I then heard Ben say the clown threw a brick at us. I drove out of there. The back window was half smashed in. Everybody in the car was fine, thankfully, and Ben didn't get injured by any glass on him or anything. We called the police and reported the suspicious clown. We were glad to get away from him. I thought he was just a harmless guy. It was creepy that he followed us, but we had no idea he would try to pull a brick out and throw it at us while we were driving. The whole situation is so crazy. I wouldn't believe it if I wasn't there myself. It made for the most memorable fantasy football punishment ever. I had a terrifying experience with a clown back when I was in high school. I know that sounds crazy, but it's 100% true. It all started one night when I was at work. Back then, I lived with my parents and worked a job at a nearby convenience store. I walked to and from work, and I would ride the bus to school every day. Between work and school, I was pretty busy. I started work from 3 p.m. until 9 p.m. On this night, work went by as usual, and when I got off, I left to walk home. The walk would take me about 15 minutes on most days, and I didn't really mind it. At my job, I would just be sitting at a counter most of the time, so walking afterwards actually felt nice. Also, the neighborhood was generally really quiet. I never felt unsafe or had anything scary happen to me. It did seem a little bit creepy at night sometimes because of how quiet it would be. After leaving work, I started walking along the sidewalk. There were sidewalks for my entire walk home, but I did have to turn a couple of times. About 2 or 3 minutes in, I noticed somebody kind of up ahead. They were standing on the grass between the sidewalk and the street, kind of randomly. It was dark out, and they were quite far away at the moment. As I approached closer, though, I soon realized that this was a clown, or at least somebody dressed up in a clown costume. It was insanely creepy looking, and I knew I would have to walk past this guy. I really didn't want to, but I had to. I tried not to look as I got closer, and the clown did not say anything to me. As I passed him by, I could sense him looking me over. Still, I did not look and just kept going toward my home. At first, he appeared to stay where he was, but when I got about 20 feet away, I heard him start to move behind me. It sounded like he'd gone onto the sidewalk. I got about 50 feet ahead of him when I heard him walking along behind me. I hoped that he wasn't following me, but I got a real bad feeling that he was. When I turned, I looked behind me and saw the clown was indeed following me. He turned exactly when I did too, so there was no question that he was now following me. I kept going and tried to walk a little bit faster. I didn't look back, but listened closely just in case he started moving more quickly and began to gain on me. He didn't seem to be getting any closer, though. I crossed another street, which he also did. Now I only had a short distance to go before arriving home. When I got to my street, the clown continued to walk after me. That's when I looked over my shoulder for the first time since before. He was there, maybe 40 feet back now, and was looking at me. I walked faster, my heart racing. I was really freaked out. I wanted to start running, but I was afraid the clown would do the same if I did. Instead, I remained as calm as I could and kept moving. Soon, I made it to my driveway. I felt a lot better, but I still had to make it inside the house. I walked up and got to the front step. It was at that point the clown reached my driveway as well, and I heard him starting to walk up behind me. This made me really nervous. I scrambled to use my house key to unlock the door. I was panicking, and that was causing me to go slower than usual. I heard the footsteps quickly approaching as I fumbled around with the key. At last, I unlocked the door and went inside. As quickly as possible, I slammed the door and locked it behind me. I heard my mom say from the other room, "What was that?" She called out my name. I heard the doorknob turning behind me. I ran over to the living room, where I found my parents. I told them about the clown guy following me home. We went over to the door to look, but he was now gone. I told them the story, and my parents said they would drive me to and from work for my next shift. We figured the clown had left, and we were all very creeped out by this situation. Later that night, I went to bed, and the clown did not come back or anything. The next morning, I got up to catch the bus for school. It was really early and still dark out, because school started at 7:25. At about 6:50, the bus would usually arrive at my house. After getting ready for school, I headed out. I left my house at about 6:45 and started walking to the end of my driveway, where I would stand and wait for the bus to arrive. When I was beginning to walk down, though, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. I looked over and saw the same clown emerging from around the corner from the side of my garage. I couldn't believe my eyes. I turned and ran back inside the home and called the police right there and then. I found my parents as well and told them the man had returned. We all stayed inside the house until the cops got there, where they found the clown hiding in my backyard. I couldn't believe it. I was sure he had left the previous night. After that, I was able to get a ride with my parents to school because I missed the bus. I was just grateful to be okay. It still blows my mind that the clown was lingering in our backyard all night long. We should have called the police the previous night after he'd followed me home. We just assumed he must have left, but I guess he'd camped out on the side of the garage, which turned out to be a really good hiding place. That guy was a total creep, and this remains one of the scariest moments of my life. I'm terrified of clowns now because of it. I live by myself in an apartment. I live on the second floor of what I would say is a fairly standard apartment building. There's 4 floors total, and the building is very long, with straight hallways on each floor. It's fairly close to the city, maybe 10 minutes away, and in a decently populated area. I've lived here for about 2 years now, and I really like it a lot actually. There's one thing that happened several months ago, though, that made me question moving. It was a fairly ordinary night, and I was home all alone. My apartment has 1 bedroom, then a living room, kitchen, and bathroom. I was in the living room sitting on my couch and watching TV. I don't remember what exact time it was, but it was a little bit later at night, probably sometime after 10 or 11 or so. I had only gotten home from work about an hour prior. As I was sitting there watching the TV, I heard some noises. I thought it was coming from my next-door neighbor's apartment. That's what I assumed at least, so I didn't pay it much thought really. Some time went by, maybe 30 minutes or so. Out of nowhere, I got this weird feeling. It's hard to describe, but I suddenly became uncomfortable and started to look all around. When I looked over my shoulder, I saw my bedroom doorway. It was only about 5 feet away, and to my surprise, a random man was sticking his head out from around the corner of the doorway, staring right at me. We made eye contact for just a moment, before he quickly ducked back around the corner. I got up from the couch and in a panic, ran directly out of my apartment. I couldn't believe what was going on. How did some random guy get in there? I really didn't know what to do. I wanted to call the police, but I realized I'd left my phone inside on the couch. I thought about just driving away, but I'd also left my keys on the counter. Not knowing what else I could do, there was one person who lived in my building that I was friendly with, a woman named Courtney, who lived just down the hallway. I went to her door and knocked. Unfortunately, she did not answer. She was probably sleeping because it was pretty late at the time. That's when I decided to try and go back into my apartment just to grab my phone and keys. Maybe the guy had left or was hiding. Maybe I just imagined the whole thing. It all happened so fast that I was even questioning myself if I'd really seen it. I felt like I was going crazy. I mean, I didn't even know how on earth this guy would even get through my apartment door. I always locked everything up, and I didn't think I'd forgotten to lock anything that day. When I went back to my door, I finally got up the nerve and opened it. My plan was to quickly run to the couch, grab my phone, and then run back to the door. On the way there, grab my keys right off the counter. It would probably take me less than 10 seconds total. However, as soon as I opened up the door, the very first thing I saw was the man standing in my living room, already facing me. I shut the door just about as fast as I had opened it and sprinted away. I ran down the hallway into the stairs and ran downstairs till I made it to the first floor. I left the building. I couldn't get to my car because I didn't have my keys, so I walked out to the sidewalk that went along the road. I walked along the road until I saw a gas station that was open. When I got there, I went inside and asked the clerk to call the police. Then I waited until they arrived. When they got there, we went back to my apartment, but obviously the man was gone. They searched all around the building and in my place. He had stolen my laptop, my wallet, and a couple of other things. My phone was still there, but probably only because it had fallen in between the couch cushions, and he didn't see it. I'm not sure if the man was ever found. My best guess as to how he got in was by somehow getting out onto my balcony. I did have a small balcony, and it would be difficult but not impossible to get to it from the ground level. The door to the balcony was closed, but it was fairly flimsy. He must have entered from there when I was at work. I really didn't think that anybody would be able to get to it from the outside. Since that experience, everything's been pretty good, and I haven't had any break-ins or attempted break-ins. I got a new laptop and credit cards, but I still wonder how that man chose to go into my place. Did he watch me before or something? I don't know, but I'll never forget seeing him that night. This happened back when I was younger. I believe I was about 14 at the time. I remember it pretty well. It all started on a Friday night. My parents were going out of town to go to some wedding I had not been invited to. I didn't care though. I found weddings boring and would rather stay at home and play video games anyway. My parents left on Friday afternoon. After I got back from school, I was sort of excited to have the place all to myself for a little while. My mom let me order a pizza to be delivered that night. I got it and watched TV in the living room. Maybe an hour into that, at around 8 p.m. or so, there was a knock at the front door. I didn't know who it could possibly be. I felt a little bit nervous, actually, as I got up from the couch to go and check. I looked out of a window and saw this man standing there. He was clearly not one of my neighbors, and I didn't recognize the man at all. He was wearing a black jacket and this winter hat-looking thing. He also had a big beard. There was no way I was answering the door, though. He knocked again, and I just stood there waiting for this man to go away. I was pretty confident that he could not see me from where I was. Eventually, I did see the man turn and walk away. I was a little creeped out now, and didn't know why the man could have possibly come to our house. I figured that would be that, though, and went back to what I was doing. Maybe 30 minutes to an hour later, I decided to go up to my room and play some video games. I went upstairs, got in my room, shut off the lights, and closed the door, then got into my gaming chair and put my headset on. I had a pretty good setup in there, and really enjoyed it. 30 minutes into that gaming session, though, I was interrupted. I heard a knock on the door, but it wasn't the front door. It was coming from my bedroom door. My heart started racing like crazy instantly. I became as scared as a human being could possibly be. I didn't know what to do. Very quietly, I got up from my chair and turned the TV off. Now it was completely dark in there. I could see very little. I was kind of expecting the door to just open, but it didn't. I got down to the ground, careful not to make any noise. My gaming chair was sort of in the corner of the room, away from the door. My closet was half open, just a few feet away from me. I crawled over there quietly, careful not to make a single sound. Whoever it was knocked again. Somebody was right outside my door. I figured it was probably the man who had knocked on the front door earlier in the night. I was able to crawl my way into my bedroom closet. It was not that big, but there was enough space for me to fit inside of it. Plus, my room was pretty messy. As a teenager, I had clothes and random things strewn all about. There was a huge pile of clothes in my closet, so I went inside of it. I covered myself completely. In the middle of doing this, I heard the door start to creak open. I froze and hoped I would not be visible. I didn't hear the man walk inside, but I could tell he was in there, moving about very quietly. He took steps inside my bedroom. I was terrified. I held my breath. He was in there for only 30 seconds when he suddenly turned around and left the room. I heard him walk out. I had just gotten a cell phone at that point just a few months prior, so I quickly grabbed it and dialed for the police. I tried to make sure the guy couldn't hear me, wherever he was. I whispered to the 911 operator what was going on, and then hung up because I was worried the man would find me. He was still somewhere upstairs, but I couldn't tell where he was. I went deeper into my closet, just in case the man came back. He did not come back to my room, though. After waiting for what felt like a really long time and not hearing anything else, the police finally arrived. I left my closet and my bedroom. I saw the police had actually caught the man. He was back downstairs. I was told he had been hiding in the basement. I hadn't heard him go downstairs at all, but then again, I was under a pile of clothes shut away in my closet. It was a huge relief. My parents were called and told about it, and they ended up coming back home that very same night. They grabbed me and made me go to the wedding with them anyways, because they didn't want to leave me alone. I didn't really want to be alone either. That was probably the craziest night of my life, and I will never forget it. I used to live in a townhouse duplex by myself, with my dog and 2 cats near a train station. There were often commuters who parked outside my place and passed by throughout the day and night. Occasionally, I had cigarettes or stuff stolen from my front veranda. I even had my next-door neighbor's ex-boyfriend come to my door telling me he had a man after him and he had a gun. None of this scared me like the night I was watched, though. My dog lives mostly indoors. I would take him out for the last wee before bed. My backyard light was broken and was up too high for me to change the bulb myself, so I always took him out to the front instead. That night, it was around 11 p.m., and I took him out to the front as usual. It was a hot summer night, and I was mindlessly standing on the footpath when I saw movement across the road from me. Out of nowhere, a man had appeared, walking diagonally across the street away from me. I thought this was odd because I hadn't seen him come from the other direction. I continued to think about it. Where he had come from was outside a house that was being renovated. I knew the owners weren't living there at the moment and thought maybe he was going to try and steal some stuff. I kept looking down the road to where he had gone. He had turned the corner down the next street. I kept watching when suddenly I saw his head pop around the corner to check if I was still outside. Needless to say, this gave me the absolute creeps, so I grabbed my dog and ran inside. I turned off all my lights and went upstairs to my bedroom, which is at the front of the townhouse and faces the street. I thought I would keep watch of my neighbor's house for them and call the police if the suspicious man came back. I peered through my blinds, which covered sliding doors coming off a small balcony. Like clockwork, I see a dark figure walk down from the corner and down my street. He was moving toward the house across the road, and then suddenly I lost sight of him. A tree in front of my townhouse obscured my view for a moment. Then I saw him again. He was not just there, though. He was stopped at the top of my driveway, standing there like Jason Voorhees. I kid you not, his arms were out by his sides, and his legs were apart in an unnatural stance. It was like he was preparing for something, like he wanted to kill me. My heart was racing so hard I could barely hear. I'm standing there slack-jawed, looking at this would-be assailant, when one of my cats comes over to see what's happening. My cat slid his body between the blinds and the window, further opening it. I could see more clearly that this man was looking upward toward me. Surely he could see me. If he did, this didn't stop him at all. He started walking down my driveway, undeterred with a fixated gaze. I lost sight of him again under the balcony and awning. By this time, my eyes were watering in fear, and tears were streaming down my face. I didn't know what to do. I went to sit on my bed. I picked up my mobile and dialed my dad, who lived only a suburb away. He answered. I whispered to him what was happening, and he said he would be there as soon as he could. I lied down in my bed and stayed as still as I could. Tears were rolling down my cheeks, and I was full of fear, not knowing what this man was doing downstairs. What if he could get in? What if I hadn't remembered to lock the doors? Then it dawned on me. Why am I lying here in the dark crying? I turned a light on. After what seemed like a lifetime but was probably only a couple of minutes, my dad arrived. He had an umbrella with him. I live in Australia, so no knives, but he could have at least brought a knife instead. I stayed on the phone with Dad while he searched outside for the man. The man was gone. Maybe me turning the light on had scared him off or something. I called the police, who said I should have called them sooner. Of course I should have. I don't know why I didn't really. They came out with a sniffer dog, but they couldn't find him either. I don't know what he wanted, but for a good year after, I was extremely scared of living there. I'm still a bit of a scaredy cat, but reading other stories makes me realize I'm not alone. We can all learn from these experiences, so we know what to do next time if something scary happens. I guess I must look like someone who's a good opportunity to kidnap or something, because this is the second attempted kidnapping story that happened to me. For reference, I'm a 22-year-old female. I'm also very small, and have always been petite for my entire life. When I was around 7 or 8 years old, my brother, who was a year younger than me, was between 6 or 7. My sister came to visit us all. My sister is actually 15 years older than me, and she wanted to spend the day with my brother and I. She took us to a bigger city about 45 minutes away that had much more to do. We ended up going down to the river, and the place we went was very interesting. It was a popular spot and in the middle of town as well, so it was relatively safe. It was a big U shape, so usually when people brought their kids, they'd hang out at the tip of the U because that's where the water was the safest. My sister didn't really want to swim, but my brother and I really did. We put on our little swimsuits and ran in. Not long after we started playing around, a man walked over to me. I've never been one to judge, but little me thought this guy looked dirty and smelled gross. He was basically totally naked, except for some ratty underwear. I didn't really think that was a big deal at the time, though. The man came right over to me. "Hi there, pretty girl. How are you?" I had never been taught stranger danger. I lived quite a sheltered life, private school my entire life, overprotective parents that rarely allowed me to leave the house without them, that sort of thing. So I thought this man really just wanted to be friends. He asked me for a hug. At the time, whenever anyone asked me for a hug, I would give them one. So after hugging me, he grabbed my hand and refused to let go. He then said, "Is this your brother?" I said yes, and he said something along the lines of, "You're both so pretty." He was still holding my hand tight. "How would you guys like to go on a little adventure?" My brother and I were excited because we didn't understand that we would not like where this adventure was going. "Okay, great. You just have to come with me. Let's make it a surprise for your mom." I told him she was my sister, and he said, "Even better," which I still didn't understand. He started to pull me away from my sister, who had looked away because someone she knew had stopped to say hello to her. He told my brother to come along as well. All of a sudden, I heard my sister scream my name so loud, everyone within earshot looked over. She started yelling things like, "Let go of my sister, you son of a shit," and "I'm calling the cops, you perv, give her back," things along that nature. Actually, other parents who were around were grabbing their kids as a precaution, and many seemed like they were jumping in ready to help if the guy attempted to put up a fight. My sister ran into the river to pull me out of his grip. She grabbed my brother's hand too while carrying me away. She decided she didn't want to let the creepy dude ruin mine and my brother's fun though. She took us to a different part of the river in the same area that was still very popular and had lots of kids and families around. My sister was sitting and watching us. We were not too far away from her when I pointed out, "Hey, look, it's my friend from before." My sister lost it on the dude. He literally tried to say to her, "Come on, I'll watch the kids. Why don't you go shop for a few hours? You can have them back when you're done. I'll have fun taking care of them." She told him he was a sick bastard and he was going to regret hanging around if he tried it again. He tried once again to convince her to let him take me, and he was edging his way over to me and my brother again. My sister punched him in the face, then kicked his legs out from under him and stepped on his chest. She told him that he would get a lot worse if he dared to do anything else. We did tell a police officer, but they said it was probably just a homeless man and there was nothing they could do about it. My sister got my brother and I ice cream, so we felt a bit better about having to leave early. My dad was not happy when the first thing we told him was my sister had beat up a guy, but he was even more furious when he learned what actually happened. So this happened to me about 6 months ago now. I'm originally from a town in the north of the UK, but I was living in a different part of the country at the time for university. I was just going into my second year, so I had moved from student accommodation to a house share with 4 other girls. We were in a pretty nice house in a small dead-end street. All the shops and bars were at the end of our street as well. I was in a bedroom that was on the bottom floor at the front of the house. It had originally been a living room, but had been changed into a bedroom for student housing. Because it used to be a living room, the window was this huge bay window that took up the entire length of the front wall. The house had a big driveway and a front garden, both with fences around. This meant you couldn't walk past the front of the house without intending to be there. You would have to walk up the driveway. I had been living in the house for about 2 weeks when this happened. On this particular night, there were only 2 of us in, as our other 3 roommates had gone home for the weekend. The other girl that was in had a second-floor bedroom, also on the front of the house. It was around 2 a.m., and I was sat in bed watching some Netflix. I didn't usually stay up this late, but I was talking to a new boy at the time, and I would often stay up really late just to talk to him. Sad, I know, but new relationships are very exciting. I remember wanting to go to sleep at about 12:30 and deciding to stay up for a bit longer just to talk to him. I'm so glad I did that. At this time, I was quite naive and didn't really think much about the dangers of not locking doors or leaving windows open. I grew up in a very nice area where we didn't ever have to lock our doors, and so I wasn't out of this mindset yet. This experience definitely changed that though. I had one of my windows slightly open, and my curtains were open as well. The curtains didn't matter too much because of the way the house was built. The garden and trees were right in front of my window anyway, meaning no one could see in unless they were standing directly in front of it. Being so naive, I didn't think that was a possibility anyone would even try. I was half laying down, half sitting up in bed, with my laptop in front of me. I didn't have my laptop on too high a volume, as although she was upstairs, there was another person in the house, and I wanted to be respectful. All of a sudden, though, I saw a shadow swiftly move past my window, as if a person was running past. I froze immediately, as like I mentioned, there was no way someone could just walk past that area unless they walked down my driveway and were specifically coming to our house. Maybe someone had walked down the wrong driveway or was cutting through and was going to jump the fence to another house. Something didn't sit right about this all. However, I left my laptop running and looked at the window for just a second. I couldn't see anything outside since it was so dark out. I could make out some sort of shadow on the wall just next to it though. For a second there was nothing. Then the shadow of a man went past once more. The shadow of another man about 2 seconds after. At this point I knew something was wrong here. I shut my laptop immediately in the hope that if they looked into my window they wouldn't see me. A bit of time passed, maybe a minute or two. I sat in the pitch black, waiting to see if I could see anything else. After this bit of time went by, another shadow of a man went past my window in the opposite direction. It was as if they had both walked in front of my window to the back of the house, but only one had returned. I was certain at this point that something was wrong here, but for some reason I couldn't bring myself to act. My brain was trying to process a million things at once, and I was so scared I froze. I felt like if I moved, they would immediately know I was there, and I had no idea whether that was a good thing or a bad thing. For all I knew, they were hoping for a young 19-year-old girl to be inside. I didn't want to run the risk of letting them know that there was. I was also completely naked under my covers, and it definitely crossed my mind that if I got up, someone would see in through the window and see me naked. Who knows what they'd do after? After what felt like an eternity of just sitting and waiting, I heard a loud bang on my window. It sounded like someone had hit something such as a rock off of it with great force. I assumed they were trying to break it, and panicked. I can't explain what was going through my mind, but it was almost like I was waiting for something definitive to happen before I got up, as if I was being over-dramatic or something. After the loud noise, I would say maybe 30 seconds went past. All of a sudden my curtains started moving, and I could see a hand coming around the side of them to move them out of the way. I looked over to see the figure of a man climbing in through my window. He was halfway through, with the top half of his body already inside my room. That's when my mind finally decided this was a fight or flight situation. I shot up and ran toward my door on the other side of the room. It was locked, so I had to fumble for the key, turn it, and then open the door. Then run out, all while making a huge amount of noise. I ran up the stairs and knocked on my roommate's door. Still completely naked, I should add, so the image she must have had when she opened her door is quite amusing to think about. She opened the door almost immediately, which I found odd for it being 2 a.m., but I was thankful nonetheless. I told her what happened, and we locked her door and started panicking. Neither of us knew what to do. We had never been in a situation like this before. Being young and stupid, I decided to ring up my mom. Completely not helpful in this situation, but I wasn't thinking straight. She told me to ring up the police immediately, obviously. We called the police because we didn't know if the men were still in the house or not. They arrived within 2 minutes, as it may have been an active burglary. I had left my laptop and all my possessions in my room, other than my phone. It just happened to be in my hand when I ran, so if they were in my room, they would have plenty to take. The police arrived and we threw down some keys from the top window to them so they could let themselves in. They searched the whole house top to bottom and found no one. I went down when they assured us everything was safe and checked my room. Nothing had been taken. I knew for sure they must have come inside, but my laptop was still clear as day on my bed, and surely that would have been the first thing they had taken. The police thought I must have scared them off by getting up, as they must not have been expecting anyone to be home. Maybe they thought the room was just a living room. It made sense for it to be, having expected to rob the house while everyone was asleep upstairs. I had this crazy thought process through all of this, where I started wondering if I really had seen what I thought I had. I started doubting myself and wondering if I was just insane. When I went down to check my room window, though, it had been completely open to its fullest extent, whereas I had only opened it a tiny crack at most. This just confirmed that what I'd seen was completely real. I learned a valuable lesson about leaving windows open that day, that's for sure. While the police were there, they actually got radioed about an attempted robbery a couple of streets along from mine, and they suspected it was the same two people. Nothing ever came back about that though, so they mustn't have caught them, unfortunately. They told us that if they did catch anybody engaging in a similar crime, they would get back in touch, but to this day, they haven't. So either they've been caught and not connected to my case, or they've never been caught at all. The CSI came the next day and managed to get a fingerprint from my window, but they said the person must have been sweating or something, as the fingerprint was way too smudged to get anything from. I'm so glad I decided to stay up later, as if I hadn't been awake for this, they would have been physically in my room by the time I'd noticed. The thought of waking up to two men in my room is terrifying. I'm not sure what they would have done to me if they got inside before realizing I was there, and that there was no easy escape for them. They would have had to climb back out that tiny window again, or unlock my bedroom door and go out the front door. Not to mention the fact I was ended. It doesn't bear thinking about. My roommate told me after the police left that she actually woke up for some reason about 5 minutes before I came flying up the stairs. She said when she'd heard the loud bang on my window, she was already awake. She had started to get a bad feeling after that. She sat on the end of her bed waiting for me to come up the stairs just in case. It's very interesting that she woke up during this, as the men were not loud at any point, other than when they struck the window. Maybe that says a lot about the body's ability to detect danger. I unfortunately ended up being not able to sleep in that room after, not without having all the lights on. Soon after, I decided to move back home for university because I felt so uneasy living down there. This takes place in a fairly large city, roughly 8 or so years ago. I'm a female, and at the time I was in my mid-20s. There used to be a gay bar that did goth nights every Saturday night. I would head out there fairly often with my friends. This night there was a group of about 5 of us that went together. Plus, we always ran into more people we knew once we got there. At some point, I left my friends on the dance floor and went up to the bar to get another drink. It was pretty crowded, so the only place I could squeeze into was right next to some guy on a bar stool at the very end of the counter. I ordered my drink and he looked over and said hello. He had a pretty interesting accent, so I asked him where he was from. He replied that he was originally from Ethiopia. We made small talk as I was waiting for my drink, and I commented that I had a neighbor as a child who was also from there. The exact details of the conversation are a bit hazy. It was years ago, and to be fair, I was not paying super close attention at the time either. Because of that, I'm not sure exactly how the conversation went in this direction, but I do remember these words snapping my brain's focus back onto him. I killed people there. Oh, well, I awkwardly chuckled, thinking maybe this was some weird drunk guy thinking he would say weird creepy things to a goth girl at the bar. Maybe it was a really bad attempt at flirting. My drink arrived and I remember stirring it and trying to ease my way out of the conversation. I was still waiting for my change. "You mean you used to kill people?" He shook his head and replied very casually, "No, I still do." Uh-huh. My change could not arrive fast enough. I tried another awkward laugh and made some snarky comment about how I was fat, and if he tried to kill me, I'd fight back and sit down on him. I don't know, I had no idea what to say in this situation. Again, casually, without any emotion in his voice, he replied, "There's no trying. If I decide to kill someone, I kill them." My change finally arrived, and I took my drink, which I'd not let leave my hand or line of sight for an instant. I excused myself and headed back over to my friends on the dance floor. I watched as he turned his stool so he could keep an eye on me. He just sat there sipping his own drink, never looking away. Finally, at some point, I saw him put down his empty glass and move out the front door. I sighed in relief and continued to enjoy my night out. Several hours later, Goth Night was ending, and the next theme DJ was taking over. My friends and I were saying our goodbyes, and I started walking to the front door. I turned around to see the friend that had given me a ride was stuck in a conversation with another acquaintance. I waited near the door just inside the building. That's when he grabbed me. The guy from the bar dragged me in farther into a dark corner, out of line of the exit. I was in shock. I couldn't make a sound at first as he pinned me to the wall, face pressed against it, and twisted one of my arms behind my back. It seemed like an eternity he held me there, pushing himself up firmly behind me, almost like he was trying to hide me even more in the shadows. There were no lights near us, and there was no reason for anybody to walk by this corner. Even if I yelled, I wasn't sure anyone would hear me, since the DJ had just started up. Somehow, I managed to shove myself back against him once my fight instincts kicked in. In his surprise, his grip loosened just a bit, and the angle he held me at relaxed. I managed to shove my fist against his balls. I have no idea to this day how I bent myself around in just the right way, but he doubled over in pain and I ran. I grabbed my friend out of her conversation and breathlessly gave a Cliff Notes version of what happened as I dragged her to the emergency exit. Before I could escape, I was stopped by security. He told me I couldn't go that way, and I had to leave at the front of the bar. I tried to explain to him that there was a guy up there that tried to attack me, but he wouldn't listen. He tuned it out and thought I was just some drunk girl. Thankfully, my friend and I managed to get the attention of a few other people we knew, and we headed out the front as a group. I didn't see the guy anywhere, but I was terrified of getting through the dark parking lot to the car. I just knew he had to be out there hiding somewhere. My friend and I ran as fast as we could and dove into the car. She pulled out of the parking lot space before I could even get my seatbelt on. The creepy guy was nowhere to be seen, though. I checked the news the next day to see if there had been any other attacks, or God forbid, any murders in the area, but there was nothing. I don't really remember many of his features, what he was wearing, or even how he sounded. I will never forget, though, the emotionless, blank, and matter-of-fact way he stated that he killed people, and the way his dark eyes stared at me like I was his prey. I never went back to that bar. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you liked the video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have any feedback for me as well, be sure to leave that in comments below the video. If you guys have a story you'd like to send in, or if you'd like to contact me for any reasons, there will be links to my social media in the description below the video, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter accounts. go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is if it has one, what type of story it is if it has one, and how you'd like to be credited in the description below the video. Please make sure to include as much detail as you feel comfortable with and try to use as much proper grammar as possible to make sure you have the highest chance of appearing in a future video. Overall, I think that's pretty much it for now, guys, so thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.